The Grand Concert Hall of the St. Petersburg Conservatory was a palace of sound, a temple where music was not just played, but worshipped. Its marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the air always seemed to hold a faint whisper of past melodies. A little Mozart here, a trace of Tchaikovsky there. To the students who rushed through its corridors, with violin cases clutched like sacred relics, and to the maestros whose voices boomed with authority, this was the center of the musical universe. But for one man, it was simply home. He was the janitor. Most people didn't know his name. If they thought of him at all, he was just part of the scenery a slight. Older man in a faded blue work shirt, pushing a squeaky cart loaded with brooms, mops, and bottles of cleaner. His hair was more gray than brown, and his hands, usually tucked into his pockets, were crisscrossed with fine lines and scars from a lifetime of labor. He moved through the grand halls with a silent, almost apologetic grace, a ghost among the living, breathing artists. His official name was Leo, but nobody called him that. To the bustling students, he was Steric, old man. To the busy administrators, he was the cleaner. He preferred it that way. Being invisible meant he could listen, and listen he did. That was his real work, his secret life. While polishing the brass handrail of the grand staircase, he would stop, cloth frozen in hand, to catch a student in a practice room struggling through a Chopin etude. He would smile softly at the stumbling passages, his fingers twitching slightly on the cloth as if guiding the notes. During evening rehearsals, he would linger in the darkest back row of the empty auditorium, watching the orchestra shape a storm of Beethoven under the fiery command of director Orlov. He saw not just the music, but the sweat, the frustration, the fleeting moments of triumph on a young cellist's face. Director Orlov was a force of nature. A former virtuoso violinist, he ruled the conservatory with a temperament as dramatic as the music he championed. His voice, a deep baritone, could be heard praising a flutist to the heavens one moment and reducing a trumpeter to tears the next. He had a particular love for the grand piano that stood center stage in magnificent ebony black Steinway. It was his prized possession, polished daily by a specialist, tuned with religious fervor. No one touched it without his explicit permission. It was not an instrument. It was a king, and Orlov was its sole protector. Leo's kingdom was far humbler. Deep in the basement, past the heating pipes that groaned like sleeping dragons, was a storage room. It was cluttered with broken music stands, old velvet curtains smelling of dust, and stacks of faded sheet music. And there, in a corner under a single bare bulb, sat an old upright piano. Its walnut veneer was chipped. One leg was reinforced with a stack of books, and several keys had a faint yellow tinge. It was forgotten, discarded, waiting to be thrown away to Leo. It was everything late at night. After the last prodigy had slammed their practice room door, and the hallways fell into a profound silence, Leo would finish his duties. Instead of heading home to his small, quiet apartment, he would make his way down to the basement. He would pull the chain on the bare bulb, which cast a warm, lonely pool of light over the piano. Then he would sit on the wobbly stool, roll up the sleeves of his work shirt, and let out a long, slow breath. The transformation was immediate. The stooped shoulders straightened. The tired eyes closed. The careful, calloused hands, which spent the day gripping a mop handle, would hover over the keys with a gentle, poised authority. And then he would play. He didn't play the flashy, difficult pieces the students practiced to show off. He played the music that lived in his bones. Old Russian folk songs his mother used to hum, their melodies full of longing and wide, snowy fields. Simple, soulful passages from composers long gone, but he played them as if he were having a conversation with the ghosts in the room. The piano, out of tune and worn, sang for him. It creaked and sighed, but under his touch, those imperfections became part of the music, a sound full of history and heartache and quiet, resilient joy. In these moments, Leo was not a janitor. He was a man speaking the only language that truly made sense to him. This secret ritual had gone on for years, a perfect, peaceful balance. Until one Tuesday night, Director Orlov had stayed late, furious over a funding report. As he stormed toward his office, a misplaced key forced him to take the long way through the basement. He was muttering to himself, his footsteps echoing sharply on the concrete, when he heard it. Music. Not just any music. It was a segment of a Rachmaninoff prelude, but played not with clinical precision, but with a raw, aching emotion that stopped Orlov in his tracks. The tone was watery, the piano clearly inferior, but the feeling behind it. It was undeniable. Someone was playing his conservatory's discarded piano, with a soul he hadn't heard in any of his top students. His curiosity burned away his anger. He followed the sound, his fine leather shoes stepping quietly past the pipes. He peered around a stack of old scenery flats into the storage room, and there he saw the janitor, the old cleaner. His back was to the door, his work shirt a stark contrast to the polished tails Orlov was used to seeing on his stage. The man's eyes were closed, his face a mask of serene concentration, his hands moving with a fluid, natural grace over the yellowed keys. Orlov's initial shock curdled into something darker, a sense of violation. This sacred space, this art form, was being pawed at by the help. The beauty of the moment was erased by the sight of the man's worn trousers and scuffed shoes. It felt like a trespass. He stepped into the pool of light. "You!" He boomed, his voice like a crack of thunder in the small room. Leo's hands jerked away from the keys as if they'd been burned. The music died in a discordant jangle. He spun around on the stool, his eyes wide with panic, the peaceful expression shattered. "What do you think you are doing?" Orlov advanced, his face red. He gestured wildly at the piano. "This is not a toy. This is not for cleaning staff to amuse themselves with." Leo tried to stand, but his legs were weak. I'm sorry, Director. I was just... The piano, it is just sitting." "Just sitting?" "It is sitting here because it is worthless. It is garbage. And you," Orlov said, his voice dropping into a cold, contemptuous whisper, "you are putting your dirty hands on it. You think you can just play? Like you are one of them? Like you belong here?" He took a final step, looming over Leo, who had shrunk back into himself. Orlov pointed a rigid finger first at Leo, and at the piano. "Listen to me, Starek. Listen well. Asterisk, asterisk. And touch my piano, poor guy. Asterisk, asterisk. Do you understand? Not this one. Not any of them. Your job is to clean the floors, not to dirty the instruments. If I see you near a keyboard again, you will be looking for a new job. Now get out." The words hung in the dusty air, each one a nail. Leo nodded, not meeting Orlov's eyes. He stood up, his movements slow and heavy, the vibrant man from moments ago completely gone, replaced once more by the invisible janitor. He shuffled past the director, his head bowed so low his chin touched his chest. Orlov watched him go, a mixture of residual fury and something else, maybe the faintest, quickly smothered echo of the beautiful music he'd heard. He shook his head as if to clear it. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hands. Then he turned and left the room, making a mental note to have the maintenance supervisor lock this door tomorrow. The incident was over. Order was restored. Upstairs, Leo collected his worn coat from his locker. The walk home through the cold, dark streets of St. Petersburg was longer than usual. The usual comforting shadows felt hollow. He shoved his hands deep into his pockets, feeling the cold metal of his keys. But he could still feel the ghost of the piano keys under his fingers, and the director's words played on a cruel, endless loop in his mind. Asterisk, poor guy. Poor guy. Poor guy. Asterisk. He looked up at the conservatory's magnificent facade, its windows dark now. For the first time in many years, it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a fortress, and he was firmly forever on the outside. The frost had settled deep into the stones of the city, and inside the conservatory, a different kind of chill had taken root for Leo. The basement door was now locked. He had checked the very next night, giving the handle a gentle, hopeful rattle. It was firm, unmoving. The message was clear. His kingdom was gone. He threw himself into his work with a quiet desperation. He polished the marble floors in the main foyer until they shone like frozen lakes, his reflection staring back at him, a gray man in a gray world. He scrubbed the practice room windows, through which he could see students alive with music, their faces contorted in effort or ecstasy. The sounds still reached him, but now they felt like whispers from a party he'd been thrown out of. He cleaned Director Orlov's office with particular care, dusting the framed diplomas and the photographs of the director shaking hands with famous musicians. He did not look at the grand piano on the stage during his evening rounds. He kept his eyes on his mop bucket, tracing the path of the wheels along the familiar grooves in the wooden floorboards. Director Orlov, for his part, had almost forgotten the incident. It was a minor irritation, a brief breach of protocol, now solved. His mind was consumed by the upcoming Winter Gala, the most important event of the season. A famous conductor from Moscow was visiting with his orchestra, and they were to perform a monumental piece, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. It was a beast of a composition, a mountain only the most brilliant pianists dared to climb. The conservatory's chosen climber was their rising star, a young man with fingers like lightning and a head of wild, curly hair. He was brilliant, arrogant, and for the past 2 months, every conversation in the building had been about his preparation for this very night. The day of the gala arrived. The air buzzed with nervous excitement. Flowers were arranged in the foyer. The grand piano was given a final, loving tuning. Leo worked silently, arranging chairs and wiping down railings. A part of the machinery that made the magic happen, unseen and unheard. Then, 4 hours before the curtain was to rise, the disaster struck. It was not dramatic. There was no scream or crash. The young pianist, pale and sweating, simply walked into Orlov's office and said he could not stand up. A vicious fever had gripped him overnight. His head was pounding. His hands were trembling. The doctor, called in a panic, took one look and shook his head. Hospital. Now, and no playing for a week at least. The silence that followed the slam of the office door was louder than any music. Orlov stared at the space where his star had just stood. The gala was sold out. The Moscow conductor was already here, a man known for his own fiery temper. The orchestra was warming up. The city's elite were dressing in their finest. And there was no pianist. Panic, cold and absolute, washed through the halls. Alternatives were suggested and discarded. Another student? No one else knew the piece to performance level. A different, simpler piece? The conductor refused. The posters advertised Rachmaninoff. Postpone? Impossible. Orlov paced like a caged animal in his office, running his hands through his hair. His career, the conservatory's reputation, it was all about to crumble over a fever dot in the eye of this hurricane. An old woman moved with calm purpose. She was the head of stage logistics, a woman who had been at the conservatory longer than anyone could remember. She had a face like a kind walnut and eyes that missed nothing. She had seen Leo listen. She had, on occasion, left the basement door unlocked just to hear the old piano sing in the late hours. She knew a secret. She knocked on Orlov's door and entered without waiting. "Director," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Not now." Orlov barked, not looking up from the window. "There is a pianist." Orlov turned, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. "Who? Where?" "Here, in the building." "Who?" "Petrov? He's in Prague." "Ivanova?" "She has the tendinitis. She can't." "The janitor." Orlov stared. He blinked. Then a harsh, humorless laugh burst from him. "You have lost your mind. Get out." The old woman did not move. "I have heard him. In the basement. On the old piano. He was playing the Rachmaninoff. Not all of it, but pieces. The hard parts. And he was not just playing the notes. He was feeling them. More than the boy with the fever ever did." The memory, unwanted, flooded back to Orlov. The sound in the dusty basement. The raw emotion that had, for a second, touched him before his pride smothered it. "No," he said firmly. "Absolutely not. It is ridiculous. He is a cleaner. He would fall apart in front of an audience. He would humiliate us." "We are already humiliated," the old woman said simply. "The choice is between a silent piano and a chance. What is the risk? You tell the audience he is a substitute, a last-minute stand-in. Expectations are low. If he fails, you blame the circumstance. But if he can play, you save the night." Orlov wrestled with it. The idea was preposterous, insulting to the very stage he presided over. Yet the cold truth of her words settled on him. A silent piano was a funeral for his reputation. He looked at the clock. 3 hours left. He found Leo in the custodial closet, quietly counting bottles of floor wax. The man flinched when the director's shadow filled the doorway. Expecting another reprimand, "You, come with me," Orlov said, his voice tight. Leo followed, confused, to the empty, darkened auditorium. The stage loomed, the grand piano a dark shape in the spotlight's ghost. Orlov stood with his arms crossed, not looking at Leo, but at the piano. "The soloist is ill. There is no one else." He spoke to the air, as if explaining to the walls. "The old woman from the stage says you can play. She says you have heard the concerto. That you can manage it." Leo's heart began to hammer against his ribs. He said nothing. Orlov finally turned to him, his gaze sweeping over Leo's worn work clothes, his tired face. The director's expression was one of profound distaste, as if he were swallowing something bitter. "This is what will happen. You will put on a black suit we will find for you. You will walk on stage. You will not look at the audience. You will follow the conductor's baton exactly. You will play the notes. Just the notes. Do not try to be an artist. You are a mechanic tonight, fixing a broken machine. Do you understand?" Leo looked past him, at the piano. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. To touch those keys, to sit before that magnificent instrument. It was an impossible dream, offered in the most cruel way possible. "If you do this," Orlov continued, his voice dropping, "no one will know who you are. You will be introduced as a substitute. After the performance, you will disappear. You will never speak of it. And you will never, ever ask to do anything like this again. In return, you keep your job." It was not a request. It was a transaction. A trade of Leo's deepest, most secret dream for the guarantee of his humble, invisible reality. The insult was clear. You are not a musician. You are a tool. A temporary, shameful tool. Leo looked from Orlov's impatient face to the piano. He thought of the locked basement door, the silent nights. He thought of the music that lived inside him, screaming to get out. This was his only chance, perhaps in his entire life, to touch that world, even if it was as a ghost, a imposter. He didn't think about the audience, the famous conductor, the risk of failure. He only thought about the music. His music. And the piano. He nodded, just once. A small, tight movement. Orlov let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Good. Go with her. She will find you clothes. And remember, notes, not art. Do not embarrass me. As Leo was led away by the old stage manager, Orlov turned back to the stage. The panic had receded, replaced by a cold, gnawing dread. He had just bet the future of his conservatory on a janitor who played a broken piano in a basement. He felt like he was going to be sick. He had avoided the silence of a funeral, only to possibly step into the chaos of a spectacular public disaster. The clock kept ticking. The suit they found for him was too big in the shoulders and too short in the sleeves. It smelled of mothballs and old perfume, a costume from a forgotten production. The old stage manager had fussed with it, pinning the back, but Leo barely noticed. He sat on a wooden crate backstage, surrounded by coiled ropes and dusty curtains, his mind a perfect silent blank. The noise of the arriving audience was a distant ocean roar. The orchestra tuned up, a chaotic swirl of notes that normally would have thrilled him. Now it was just sound. Director Orlov peeked through the curtain, his face pale. He turned and gave Leo one last, sharp look, a warning and a plea mixed together. Then the stage manager touched Leo's arm. It's time. Leo walked onto the stage. The lights were a physical force, a blinding white heat that erased the world beyond the edge of the piano. He could feel the presence of 1,000 people out there in the dark, a restless, expectant silence hanging over them. He saw the silhouette of the Moscow conductor, a baton held loosely in his hand, his posture one of mild, professional boredom. The members of the orchestra looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and pity. This was not their brilliant soloist. This was a stranger, a substitute, a man who looked uncomfortable in his own skin. He reached the piano. The grand Steinway gleamed like black ice under the lights. For a terrifying second, his mind went empty. The thousands of notes, the complex architecture of the Rachmaninoff, the fingerings, the rhythms, all of it vanished. All he saw was a vast, terrifying landscape of black and white keys. He sat down. The stool was adjusted for the younger, taller pianist. He was too low. A murmur flickered through the orchestra. He ignored it. He placed his hands on the keys. They were cool and smooth, so different from the chipped, yielding ivory of his basement friend. They felt alive with potential. He closed his eyes. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was a retreat. He needed to shut out the blinding lights, the shadowy faces, the immense pressure. He needed to go home. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he was no longer on a stage. He was in the basement. The air was cool and smelled of dust and old wood. The single bulb was a warm sun. The piano in front of him was the old, faithful upright, waiting to sing. The conductor raised his baton. He gave a slight, almost indifferent nod to this unknown pianist, and brought it down. The orchestra began with a low, murmuring theme. It was Leo's cue. His hands, which had been resting lightly, now moved. The first notes came, quiet, searching. They were technically correct, but something was missing. They were just notes, as Orlov had demanded. The conductor's brow furrowed slightly. This was going to be a long, dull night. Then, something shifted. As the music unfolded, Leo sank deeper into his own darkness. He stopped thinking about the conductor, the baton, the right notes. He thought of the story. Rachmaninoff's music wasn't just notes on a page. It was an epic tale of struggle, of longing, of immense sorrow and explosive joy. It was the story of a man's soul. And Leo knew about souls that carried weight. he began to feel it. The loneliness of the long St. Petersburg winters seeped into the slower passages. The quiet, resilient hope of a sunrise over the Neva River gave a gentle lift to a rising melody. His body, so still at first, began to move with the music a slight sway, a leaning in, as if he were listening to the piano speak back to him. His fingers, hardened by a lifetime of work, found a power and a precision that was shocking. The difficult runs, the thunderous chords that made students weep in frustration, they flowed from him not as athletic feats, but as emotional outbursts. When the music was angry, his whole frame tensed, and the sound was sharp and clear like breaking glass. When it was sorrowful, his shoulders rounded, and the notes became a deep, resonant sigh that seemed to vibrate in the chest of every listener. He was no longer playing the piano. He was conversing with it. He was coaxing the story out of it. His closed eyes saw every scene, felt every emotion. A man watching from the wings, a violinist, later said it was as if the pianist was dreaming the music into existence right there on the spot. The conductor was the first to truly understand. His bored indifference had melted into surprise, then into intense focus. This was not what he had prepared for. The soloist was not following him. He was leading. The tempo had a new, breathing quality. The phrases had a heartbreaking shape he'd never heard before. The conductor was a proud man, but he was first a musician. He listened. He watched the curve of Leo's back, the absolute commitment in his posture. And then the conductor did the only thing a great artist could do. He followed. He softened the orchestra's entrance here, pushed them louder there. Shaping the sound around the sorcerer at the piano dot in the wings, Director Orlov stood frozen. His mouth was slightly open. The disdain, the dread, the cold calculation, all of it was burned away by the sheer, shocking beauty of what he was hearing. This was not the janitor. This was not the poor guy from the basement. This was a man possessed by something ancient and true. The music was no longer just Rachmaninoff. It was the man's entire life, translated into sound. Orlov felt a hot shame crawl up his neck, remembering his own cruel words. He had told this man to play notes, not art. But what was pouring from the stage was the purest art he had ever witnessed. The audience felt it too. The initial rustle of programs, the quiet coughs, had ceased entirely. They were leaning forward in their seats, caught in the spell. You could hear a pin drop in the vast hall. Some had tears silently tracing down their cheeks, not understanding why. A mother held her young daughter's hand tightly. The girl stared, mesmerized, at the man who played with his eyes shut, looking both peaceful and powerful. Leo heard none of it. He was in the storm. He was climbing the mountain. The concerto's most famous, treacherous cadenza arrived. A solo passage where the piano stands completely alone, a dizzying waterfall of notes. It was here that most pianists showed their skill or revealed their fear. Leo played it like a confession that it wasn't flawless. There was a moment where his left hand, a little stiff from years of labor, fumbled a transition. But he didn't panic. He didn't stop. He wove the stumble right back into the music, making it sound intentional, a moment of human fragility in a superhuman effort. It was that slight imperfection that broke the last barrier between him and the listeners. He wasn't a machine. He was a man, pouring out everything he had got as the final movement raced towards its earth-shattering conclusion. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. The orchestra thundered alongside him, the conductor sweating, driving them forward with wild eyes. Leo's hands were a blur, his body now fully engaged in the battle. Yet his face remained strangely serene, eyes still tightly closed. The final chords were not just played. They were struck, summoned, torn from the very heart of the instrument. Asterisk, asterisk, boom, boom. Boom dash ba dash boom dot asterisk asterisk silence dot absolute, profound, breathless silence. Leo's hands fell from the keys into his lap. He was spent. He sat there for a moment in his ill-fitting suit, in the blinding light, his chest heaving. Slowly, carefully, as if waking from a deep dream, he opened his eyes. The world rushed back in. The light, the shape of the piano, and then the sound dot. It wasn't applause that started. It was a collective gasp, as if 1,000 people had suddenly remembered how to breathe. Then, like a dam breaking, the sound erupted. It was a roar, a tidal wave of shouts, of bravos, of stamping feet that made the old stage tremble. People were on their feet, tears streaming, faces alive with awe. Leo blinked, stunned. He looked out, but the lights still blinded him. He saw only a moving, roaring darkness. He turned, confused, to the conductor. The conductor, beaming, his earlier boredom completely gone, was clapping too. He strode over, grabbed Leo's hand, and raised it high in the air, a gesture of triumph. In that moment, under the crushing weight of adoration, Leo the sorcerer vanished. The man on the stage was just Leo the janitor again, bewildered, overwhelmed, and searching the wings for a familiar face, for any anchor in this suddenly upside-down world. He saw Director Orlov standing there, not clapping, just staring, his face an unreadable mask of shock. The roar of the crowd was a physical thing. It washed over the stage, hot and deafening. Leo stood there, his hand held aloft by the beaming conductor, feeling like a scarecrow lifted by a hurricane. The bright lights turned the sea of faces into a blur of shimmering darkness. He could see mouths open in cheers, hands clapping, but the sound was a single solid wall of noise. He felt dizzy. The conductor, his face flushed with excitement, finally lowered their joined hands and leaned in close to shout in Leo's ear. "Magnificent! Who are you? Where have you been hiding?" The words were meant to be kind, but they only sharpened Leo's panic. He didn't know how to answer. He gave a small, stiff bow, more a collapse of the shoulders, and pulled his hand gently away. He needed to get off the stage. The script, as Director Orlov had laid it out, was over. He had played the notes. He had not embarrassed anyone. Now he was supposed to disappear. He took a step back, then another, his movements stiff and awkward in the unfamiliar suit. The applause seemed to grow even louder, demanding more. A chant started somewhere in the hall. Encore! Encore! But Leo was already retreating into the shadows of the wings. The moment he stepped out of the main lights, the world snapped into a different kind of focus. A backstage area was chaos, but a quiet, stunned chaos. Orchestra members were packing their instruments slowly, shaking their heads in wonder, looking at him with new, respectful eyes. Stagehands stood frozen, holding cables they'd meant to coil, and there was Director Orlov. He wasn't looking at the cheering audience. He was staring directly at Leo. His face was pale. All the blood seemed to have drained from it. His expression wasn't one of triumph or relief. It was the look of a man who had just seen the foundations of his world crack open. There was shock, yes, but underneath it, a dawning, terrible understanding. Leo avoided his gaze. He made his way, head down, toward the sanctuary of the custodial closet. He just wanted to take off the scratchy suit, put on his soft, warm work shirt, and push his mop bucket down a quiet hallway. He wanted to become invisible again. He never made it. A young stagehand, no more than 20, was staring at him, his eyes wide with recognition. This boy often helped Leo move heavy equipment, shared a cigarette with him, sometimes in the loading dock. He knew the janitor's face better than anyone in the building besides the old stage manager. As Leo passed, the boy blurted out, not with malice, but with pure, stunned amazement. "Leo? Leo, is that you?" "Holy, that was you." The words, though not loud, cut through the backstage murmur. A violinist turning the corner heard it. Her head snapped toward Leo, then to the stagehand, then back to Leo. Her eyes widened. The whisper began to spread, a quick electric current passing from person to person. "The cleaner. The janitor played? That's old Leo from the basement." Out front, the applause was finally dying down, replaced by a buzzing hum of conversation. The audience was getting to their feet, gathering coats, their faces alight with the thrill of a shared secret discovered. Who was that? I've never seen him before. Such passion, and his eyes were closed. Near the stage door, a reporter from the city's culture newspaper was trying to get Orlov's attention. He had a small notebook in his hand. Director Orlov. A triumphant save. A night no one will forget. Tell us, who is this mysterious virtuoso? Where did you find such a talent at the last minute? Orlov seemed to physically shrink from the question. He tried to muster his usual commanding air, but it fell flat. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked over the reporter's shoulder, his eyes searching for an escape route, and landed on Leo, who was now almost at the hallway door, the ill-fitting suit looking more absurd by the second. The reporter followed his gaze. He saw the man in the bad suit, saw the way the backstage staff were looking at him with a mixture of awe and confusion. He was a good reporter. He put things together fast. He took a few steps toward Leo, and his voice, louder now, rang out in the high-ceilinged backstage area. Sir, can you give us your name? How long have you been playing?" All movement stopped. The orchestra members, the stagehands, the old stage manager, everyone turned. The only sound was the distant murmur of the departing crowd. Leo froze, his hand on the cool metal of the door handle. He felt like a rabbit caught in a trap. He looked from the eager reporter to the horrified face of Director Orlov. The unspoken agreement asterisk, "You will disappear." No one will know asterisk was evaporating in the bright, unforgiving air of backstage reality. Orlov, seeing his control of the narrative slipping away, forced himself to step forward. He placed himself between the reporter and Leo, but he was addressing the small crowd that had gathered. His voice, when it came, was strained, lacking its usual booming confidence. This man is a friend of the conservatory," Orlov began, the words tasting like ash. "A last-minute substitute. A skilled amateur. We are grateful for his service tonight." The words "skilled amateur" hung in the air, pathetic and false. The pianist they had just heard was no amateur. The old stage manager, her arms crossed, let out a soft, disapproving sigh. The reporter's eyes gleamed. He smelled the real story now. He looked past Orlov, directly at Leo. "Sir, is that true? Are you an amateur? Your technique? Your interpretation?" It was masterful. "Have you studied here?" Leo looked down at his shoes, which were his own old polished work shoes, peeking out from under the fancy suit pants. He said nothing. His silence was more powerful than any lie Orlov could tell. A bass player from the orchestra, a large man with a kind face, spoke up. "I've seen him," he said, his voice low but clear. "In the halls. He works here. He cleans." A gasp, this one small and sharp, came from a group of students who had crept backstage. The truth, now spoken aloud, settled over everyone. The reporter's pen was flying across his notebook. He turned back to Orlov, his expression now one of pure professional delight. "Director, is this correct? Your last-minute savior, the man who played Rachmaninoff like a born sorcerer, is a member of your custodial staff?" Orlov was cornered. He could see the headline. He could see the ridicule, the awe, the complete unraveling of the hierarchy he cherished. All his life he had believed in order, in talent that was cultivated and presented properly. This was chaos. It was a fairy tale that made a mockery of his entire world. He looked at Leo, who finally raised his head. Their eyes met. In Leo's eyes, Olaf did not see accusation or triumph. He saw only exhaustion and a deep, quiet plea for this to be over. That look, more than anything, broke through Orlov's panic. The director's shoulders slumped, just a little. The fight went out of him. He turned to the reporter and the gathered crowd. He did not smile. He looked old and tired. Double quotes, yes, Orlov said, the single word leaving him like a weight dropping. This man, he works here. He maintains the building. He paused, swallowing hard, forcing himself to continue. Tonight he also maintained its soul. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a grand admission, but it was the truth. And in that moment, the truth was the most shocking thing of all. The reporter scribbled furiously. The students whispered among themselves, looking at Leo not with pity now, but with something like reverence. The old stage manager allowed herself a small, tight smile. Leo could bear it no longer. The stares were too much. The weight of the revelation was crushing him. Without a word, he turned the handle, pushed the door open, and slipped into the dim, quiet hallway. He left behind a silent backstage, a director grappling with a shattered reality, and the first whispers of a story that would, by morning, spread through the city like wildfire. The tale of the janitor who played like an angel, and the maestro who never saw him until he closed his eyes. The morning after the gala, the conservatory was not its usual self. The grand halls, usually echoing with disciplined scales and sonatas, hummed with a different kind of energy, a buzz of whispers and sideways glances. The newspaper had come out. The story was not on the front page, but on the front of the culture section, with a headline that was both a question and an accusation. A maestro in a janitor's coat? There was a photo, grainy and taken from a distance, of a man in an ill-fitting suit, bowing awkwardly on the stage. Leo arrived for work at his usual time, just as the gray dawn light touched the upper windows. He wore his normal faded blue work shirt and carried his lunch in a small, worn bag. He hoped, desperately, that the world had reset, that he could unlock his closet, take out his mop and bucket, and lose himself in the simple, honest rhythm of scrubbing floors. It was not to be. As he walked through the main doors, a young violinist, a girl with her hair in a tight bun, stopped her practice and simply stared at him, her bow hovering over the strings. An elderly theory professor, whom Leo had once helped retrieve a dropped sheaf of papers, gave him a slow, deep nod, a gesture of respect he had never received before. It felt heavier than any ignored. He made it to his custodial closet and shut the door, leaning against it for a moment in the quiet dark. But the quiet didn't last. The phone on the wall, a dusty black thing that almost never rang, jangled loudly. It was the director's secretary, her voice unusually polite. "Leo? Director Orlov would like to see you in his office. At your earliest convenience, please." The walk to the director's office felt longer than the walk onto the stage. His work shoes, usually silent on the marble, seemed to squeak with every step. He expected fury. He expected to be fired, his miraculous performance seen as the ultimate act of insubordination, a humiliation that could not be forgiven. He knocked softly on the heavy oak door. "Enter." Director Orlov sat behind his vast, polished desk. He looked like he hadn't slept. The newspaper was spread out before him. He did not look up as Leo came in and stood silently, his hands clasped in front of him, waiting. The silence stretched. Orlov finally pushed the paper aside and looked at Leo. The anger, the contempt Leo expected to see, wasn't there. Instead, there was a profound weariness, and something else, a raw, uncomfortable shame. "Sit," Orlov said. His voice rough. Leo sat on the very edge of the hard chair. Orlov did not speak for another long moment. He looked out the window at the courtyard. "The Board of Trustees," he began, then stopped. He cleared his throat. The Moscow conductor called. He said it was the most compelling performance of the Rachmaninoff he has ever witnessed. "He wants to know your teaching schedule?" Leo blinked. He said nothing. Orlov turned to face him. He struggled with the words, each one seeming to cost him something. "I was wrong," he said finally. The statement hung, bare and simple, in the sunlit room. "I was blind. I heard you that night in the basement, and I heard only an intruder. I did not hear the musician." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to Leo, as if he couldn't say the next part while looking at him. "This institution, my whole life, has been built on the idea of finding talent, of polishing it, of presenting it to the world. We look for it in the right places, in the right families, in the right schools." He turned around, his face pained. "We never thought to look. At the man who cleans the floors, we walk on." He came back to the desk, not sitting, but leaning on it, his weight on his knuckles. "I cannot undo what I said. I cannot take back those words. But I can, I must, offer you a place. Not as a secret, not as a ghost, a real place." Orlov laid out his offer. It was not charity. It was a correction. Leo would be given a scholarship as a mature student to study formally if he wished. More importantly, he would be offered a role as a guest instructor to give occasional master classes. "They need to hear you," Orlov said, his voice gaining a little strength. "Not just how you play, but why you play. They need to learn that music is not just in the fingers. It is in here." He tapped his own chest. He also said Leo could, of course, keep his custodial position and his salary. If that was what he wanted. Leo listened to it all in silence. The world was offering him everything he had never dared to dream of. A seat in the classrooms, respect, a title. He looked past Orlov at the sunny courtyard and thought about the cold, quiet basement and the warm, dusty storage room. "I will keep my job," Leo said quietly. "The cleaning. If that is all right." Orlov looked surprised, then gave a slow nod of understanding. "And the teaching?" Orlov asked. "I can try," Leo said. And so a new rhythm began. Leo still arrived at dawn. He still changed into his blue work shirt. He still mopped the long hallways, polished the brass, and emptied the trash bins from the practice rooms. But now, sometimes, a student would pause their frantic practicing and ask, timidly, "Leo, could you listen for a moment?" And he would stop, lean on his mop, and listen. He rarely spoke about technique. He would say things like, "This part. It sounds like you are in a hurry to get to the next part. But maybe here, the music wants to be sad for a little longer. Don't be afraid to let it be sad." In the afternoon, twice a week, he would wash his hands very carefully, put on a simple, clean sweater, and go to a small practice room that had been set aside for his sessions. He didn't call them master classes. He would sit at the piano, often with his eyes closed, and play a phrase. "Hear how it breathes?" he would say. "Now you try." His most famous lesson became the blind minute. He would have a student play a passage they knew well. Then he would say, "Now play it again. But close your eyes from the middle. Don't think about the notes on the page. Think about what you are saying." At first, students would fumble, make mistakes. But then, often, something would unlock. The music would become softer, more personal, less perfect, but more true. He was teaching them to listen to the story, not just recite the words. The conservatory changed. It became a little quieter, a little more thoughtful. The students started to look at the maintenance staff, at the old woman who worked in the library, with new eyes. Who else had a secret? Who else carried a silent music inside them? Director Orlov changed too. He never became a warm man, but he became a fairer one. He could sometimes be seen, late in the evening, standing at the back of the hallway, listening to the sound of an old upright piano drifting up from a now unlocked basement. He never apologized again aloud, but he made sure the piano was kept in good tune. One evening, as winter was settling in again, Leo finished his rounds. The building was empty and still. He did not go to the basement. Instead, he walked onto the main stage. The grand piano was there, a sheet covering it for the night. He pulled the sheet off carefully, folded it, and sat down. He played. Not Rachmaninoff this time, but a simple, old folk melody. He played with his eyes open, looking out at the empty, velvet seats. He played for the joy of it, for the peace. When he finished, he heard a soft single clap from the back of the hall. He squinted into the darkness. It was the old stage manager standing by the doors. She gave him a wave, then turned and left, her footsteps fading. Leo smiled. He covered the piano again, turned off the stage light, and walked back to his closet to get his coat. He was not a janitor. He was not a maestro. He was simply Leo, who loved music and who, finally, had found a way to belong to it completely on his own terms. The greatest piece he had ever composed was not a symphony, but a new silence in the halls, a silence that was no longer lonely, but full of quiet respect and the lingering echo of a truth that had finally been heard.